All right, before we get to weather, check this out. Scarborough Middle School's entire sixth grade class of 235 students hit Higgins Beach today to collect data about invasive crabs on Maine's coast. The students are working with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute.
Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, October 3rd, 2024 Scarborough Board of Education Business Meeting. Can we call the attendance, please?
Ms. Lindstrom,
Here.
Ms. Peterson,
Here.
Mr. Pinion,
Here.
Mr. Peony Huff,
Here.
Mr. Kelleher,
Absent.
Ms. Leon,
She's absent.
and the student reps, Ms. Ledger and Ms. Raskahana.
Both absent. Yes, thank you. All right, would everyone please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay.
Start 5 seconds early.
All right, agenda item 4.0 is the approval of the September 19th, 2024 workshop and business meeting minutes. So without objection, I will approve those. All right. Agenda item 5.0 are adjustments to the agenda. Are there any adjustments this evening?
There are none.
Agenda item 6.0 is the superintendent's report. I'll turn this over to Diane.
Slides. All right. Well, good evening. Excited to give you all a little bit of update. We are officially 1 full month into the school year. And so we have fully launched at this point. The first piece of information that I wanted to just share with you at your request to have more regular updates about enrollment are the enrollment figures for as of September 30th. Previously, I had provided you enrollment at the very start of the school year at our first September meeting. So this reflects where we are currently. And that is very similar to where we were in September. So our numbers are very steady at this point. Secondly, lots of other things that I'd like to call to your attention. First is a cause for celebration. We are really excited to report that one of our very own high school teachers has been selected as a Maine DOE Civics Teacher Leader Fellow for the 24-25 school year. So Brianna Belafontaine Krupski teaches at the high school. I was actually really excited to learn this because we get a DOE update every Friday afternoon. And a few Friday afternoons ago, I opened the update and I saw a picture of one of our own teachers. And I was like, well, this is really cool. And so I might have read that edition a little bit more carefully than some others perhaps that get sent. But this is a great honor for her. And again, as you can see, I'm not going to read all the information that's on the slide, but she has done a lot of work beyond just her role as a civics teacher. She is a nationally board certified teacher in the area of social studies, which involves a lot of extra work on her part. She also is a constitutional fellow with the National Constitution Center and a member of their teacher advisory board. And she is going to be serving in this capacity in addition to her work. So she will still continue to be a full-time civics teacher for us, but she is going to be sharing her expertise in this area with other educators across the state. So really excellent opportunity for her and speaks well for the kind of education that we can impart to our own students when we have people of her caliber working with us within the ranks. So congratulations to Brianna for that. Also just wanted to let you know we have some upcoming staff development happening in the district. Friday, October 11th, next Friday is a full workshop day. I know that we always have folks in the community wondering what mysterious work happens on professional development days. And so I think every opportunity that we can inform you about that is helpful. Next Friday, we have many of our specialty staff groups that will be attending regional professional growth opportunities instead of staying on site. As you know, you've heard me talk in the past about our belonging to the Greater Sebago Educational Alliance. And so that is a group that we belong to with 11 other school districts. And we work really well together to try to provide and fill some of the needs that we have on a regional basis rather than each of us working in our own silos. And so you can see on the slide, so many different specialty groups that are going to have opportunities, and these opportunities are being hosted across these 12 partner districts. And so the great news for those folks is this is really a critical opportunity for these educators because it's very rarely that they get to meet collectively with a lot of job-alike peers. Many of them work in islands in their own schools or only have one or two colleagues. And so this is an amazing opportunity for them. And then on site, there will be lots of opportunities for our content area teachers to do a variety of things, including content area co-planning. They're going to be reviewing data and assessment, furthering their work with SEL. As you know, that we're in the second year of our implementation with Ruler and MindUp. Folks at our elementary schools are going to learn about something called Book Creator, and our own Katie Vitro is going to be providing that professional development to each of those schools. There's going to be some work on student behavior supports, et cetera. So we do a great job of capitalizing on every moment of professional development that we get because it is very limited. Our early release day this month, which will take place on Wednesday, October 16th, is going to be dedicated to suicide awareness training for all school staff. That is a mandate from the state that every 5 years we make sure that people are getting retrained. And so that will be taking place at each of our particular school sites. Also just wanted to highlight for you again, the Higgins Beach Data Collection Day. I know that, you know, this is information that's been in our newsletter, but I also think that it's important to call out in a meeting like this because this particular opportunity that the entire 6th grade was able to participate in was really made available because of 2 outside funding sources that we had. So as many of you know, we received a Maine Outdoor Learning Initiative grant last year, the Molly grant, and that allowed for teachers at the middle school to do a lot of planning. And this particular unit is one of the units that was planned with the funds from that. And then secondly, the supplies for the trip in terms of the data collection tools, et cetera, were part of an SEF grant that the 6th grade had applied for. So, you know, we certainly do a lot with the funds that we receive from the town, but there are many other opportunities that we're limited by from our own budgets, but we're very fortunate to have partners like SEF and then to have people on our own staff writing grants so that we can be the recipient of other funds. So I think that's important for the community to know about in terms of how we're able to provide all of these things. And I can show the quick 1-minute video. Oh, yeah, you've got to do it because I'm not working that hard anymore.
All right, before we get to weather, check this out. Scarborough Middle School's entire 6th grade class of 235 students hit Higgins Beach today to collect data about invasive crabs on Maine's coast. The students are working with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute to gather data for the organization's Citizen Science Initiative. Scientists there will analyze this data that the students gathered today as part of a larger project about invasive crabs.
A pretty nice day for it too, Hunky.
We do that. Luca loves looking for crabs. It's a kid. Like slam
I
dunk
can probably
pastime.
cut that.
Well, I want to see if there's more commentary.
But again, the really neat thing about that is no one on our staff had called the news. One of the newscasters just happened to be on Higgins Beach during the time that our students were there. So he went over, approached them, took some of those photos and a quick video, and a story was born. So really exciting. And again, I think anytime that we can give our students the opportunity to experience something firsthand for learning, it definitely sinks in a different way than reading about something. So, and then lastly, in my superintendent's report, just wanted to share with all of you that our RFQ, which is short for Request for Qualifications, has been posted. As you know, we've been working really diligently with our school building advisory committee, and we're getting ready for phase 2 of that work to begin. Part of phase 2 involves getting some architectural and engineering services support on board to support that work. And so that RFQ is posted to the building project webpage with all of its details. And so anyone who's interested can take a look at that. Certainly, we want to make sure that the public knows what that includes and what the scope of that work is. And then we have also made sure that it is being posted in the typical places that these kinds of firms look at for RFQs, which is the Portland Press Herald and the Kennebec Journal. So these RFQs will be due to our office by October 18th. And then after that time, firms will be selected for interviews. Interviews will be conducted. And the goal is to have a firm selected by November 4th. So we're on a pretty aggressive timeline, but we also understand that we have a lot of work ahead. So we need to dig in.
Perfect. Thank you, Diane. Are there any questions for Diane? All right. Agenda item 7.0 is the chair's report. And so to piggyback on what Diane just ended on, the appointments committee is meeting this Friday for the building steering committee for phase 2. So we have 6 open seats. 3 of them are at large, 3 are an additional member at should we have a need for quorum purposes. If a voting member is absent, we would be able to pull up one of our additional members that aren't full members but are expected to attend the meetings. Anyways, we have a total of 6 seats open, and we had 13 applicants that submitted their applications. So we are meeting tomorrow, Friday, to seat the committee. And from there, since the RFQs are out, first meeting, I would imagine, would be shortly thereafter, so the committee can get formed and start working. The second thing I wanted to talk about is early voting starts on Monday. So it is at the Public Safety Building next door, the 7th through the 31st. For anyone who is interested in voting ahead of the election, the actual election day is November 5th. There is a school board seat that is a vacancy that was created by a resignation. That seat is up for referendum in this election. So there's one person running for the seat. If you are interested in watching, last Wednesday night was candidates night. And so that is hosted, by the Chamber of Commerce, and they invite everyone who is running for the town council seats, the sanitary district seats, and the school board seats to come, and they invite the community to ask questions, and then they answer them. So it's a really good opportunity for you to hear from the young man who is running for the school board seat. He did attend, and so there's some his is included, his question and answer session is included in here. Also included in here are the town council candidates. So there's 2 seat there. Well, there's a total of 3 seats open. 2 of them are 3-year terms. 1 is a 2-year term. So there's only 1 person running for the 2-year seat, but the 3-year seats, there are 3 people running for 2 of them, 2 seats. So that is a contested election. They all were in attendance at candidates night. So again, a good opportunity to hear their positions on policies, their positions on our school building, their position on town planning. I think they covered quite a bit. Budgeting, they did cover quite a bit. We're pretty extensive. So that's the link up there. And then the last link is for anybody who's looking for more information about the election, about absentee voting, about early voting. All of it can be found on the town's website. All right. All right. There's no questions for me. I will continue right along to agenda item 8.0, our committee reports.
And I apologize. I meant to delete this because there's nothing really to update right now. Other than what you said. And so more to come next time.
Perfect.
For the communications committee, our next meeting, we're still working on getting a date. We had a meeting on the 16th. We had a great discussion with Mrs. Vaznik on the education component for student reps on the board, as well as the journalism track. And we have 1 student has availability the 2nd semester. It was super helpful to hear about. We also have leadership in local government track, which both Abby and Grace have chosen to join the communications committee. And the students will be planning on spotlight awards among students and writing articles for the Scarborough Leader. Jenna Shannon and Ray and I met with Drew Johnson, from the Leader. He is our dedicated reporter, right? For the Scarborough Leader. Anyway, he provided us with a lot of information. We got a lot of good insight into how things are flowing at the Leader right now and when we should be turfing stories to him versus writing things up ourselves. And the goal of that was to establish a relationship with the press, create a communication to have our pieces in the paper and connect students and journalism opportunities. We are currently taking nominations for the Spotlight Award, and we will have a Spotlight Award coming up next. We're trying to coordinate that right now, but next meeting, hopefully.
Perfect. I did want to add one thing. I forgot to say this in my chair's report. Diane, myself, Principal Terrio, and Christy Zavaznik are meeting tomorrow to flesh out the ELO program and to really understand the different pieces for the students and how we fit in and what our role. So I'll report back next meeting on that too.
That's it. Thank you.
All right. I'll take curriculum. We had a first meeting to get to hear where we got to hear about the opportunities that were happening over the summer. A lot of work was done. There was opportunities for the teachers to work together and reflect on their year and then plan for this year that has now started. Without having the interruption of day-to-day work, right? It gave them this uninterrupted time that was really good for them. So they had 40+ opportunities to engage, teachers did, to engage in the summer work. There was a literacy team for K2 that planned around high-frequency word instruction. The high school department, science department met to look at lab work. Middle school teachers planned outdoor activity and learning activities. So a lot of really good opportunities for uninterrupted work time with their colleagues. Student programs all of them saw an increase. So the Elementary Reading Academy, the Middle School Connections program, and the High School Credit Recovery. At the elementary school level, there was 54 students and 12 staff that participated in the Reading Academy. 61 students with 3 staff at the middle school connections program, and 25 students taking 36 classes at the high school credit recovery. And there was a grant that funded that program that was, that allowed it to continue. So all in all, there was an increase in number across all 3 summer units. We did have a discussion around the high school program, potentially, question around, is it possible that the high school program could actually, because right now the credit recovery is meant for students who need help to get a passing grade in a class. And so the conversation we started to have was, is there a potential for that to be opened up to other students who might be interested in just taking extra coursework over the summer? But where we left it is there's that would require a budgetary, it would be a budgetary change, right? Because we would have to pay teachers to come, and it would require a little bit more thought and a little bit more planning and logistic work than just, putting a class or adding a class in. So a little bit more, nuance than it might appear on the surface. Other programs that were offered over this summer, extended summer school year services and special education, kinder camp at the primary schools, and then community services offered their summer programs as well. So we are meeting again October 28th, and it is a remote meeting via Zoom. One more slide. Jenna did a wonderful job. So the fall assessment window and spring results. So we did have a discussion around this. The fall assessment window results and spring results should be, or were expected mid-July, but what happened is they didn't actually receive them until mid-August. And that was because there was a RIT score miscalculation, so they had to recalculate the results. So they got them mid-July. Individual test results are going to be sent out to parents in approximately 2 weeks. And it was decided that, what was it? This was decided to, they're doing it to lessen any confusion around the assessments that are currently happening. So they didn't want parents to be confused as to what results they were getting. And so they were holding off a little bit before sending those results. So they are going on in 2 weeks.
Yeah, the only thing that I would just add to this is that this is the main through year assessment, so it is a state assessment. So just to kind of clarify, the problems with the scores being miscalculated or not being available to parents, that is at a state level. That was not an internal Scarborough issue.
Yes.
That happened across the state for every school district.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's
Mhm.
important clarification.
Yep.
So thank you. The other thing that Katie talked about was that she is interested in revitalizing the curriculum steering committee that has essentially gone by the wayside, I think is fair to say at this point. So it's a district-wide committee, but what she is interested in doing is actually involving the community and parents. So to have a little bit more outside involvement in the committee. She also is interested in bringing students in on the committee as well. So the goal is for her to gather a team by November and then look at holding a first meeting potentially in December. So our community members can be on the lookout for more information about this. And then from us internally, that students and staff as well would participate on that. All right. Thank you for that, Jenna, when you watch back. Those great slides. All right, finance.
I can do finance unless, okay. We had a meeting, finance this week on Monday. I was in the dark in my car for most of it, but we had a very good, it was a remote, it was a remote meeting. But it was great. We previewed the end of FY24 financials, looked at the transfer of our revenue into capital budgets that we made last night. We transferred $800,000 last year into our capital reserves. And as a preview, there'll be a discussion or recommendation to do that again this year, which is great if we're able to build up our capital reserve budget as we have large capital projects in our future, we all hope. Also talked about professional learning and the essential programs and services. So we had a kind of a refresher / informative session about how that state calculation we make up. So when everyone talks about how the state's funds education at 55%, really drilling down into what that means for Scarborough and what that means specifically. It does not mean that the state's going to fund 55% of our budget now or ever. But we went into that in a little more depth than previously, and it was very helpful to learn how that formula is made, how it has not changed with inflation, which is actually at a different part, an update of one of the meeting that I'm going to be attending as a delegate. What's one of their suggestions is that they index it to inflation. And that also how the changes get made to who gets what. So there's a minimum receiver amount. We've been in that category in the past. We're not there right now, but we certainly could go back there with some slight changes. But it depends a lot on things outside of our control. It's enrollment, our valuation as compared to other towns, our special ed numbers and other factors. It's a very complicated logarithm that only one person in the state may have ever understood, and now we all use it. But that was great, and I really thank Kate for that. It was helpful. We will have another meeting on 10/28 at 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock, and I think that one is planning to be hybrid as well. So some people will be in person. Some people will be in person. That's like a tongue twister, and some people will be on the computer.
Thank you, Frayla.
All right, long range planning. So we met on September 17th and had a really great presentation from Todd Jepson, kind of on the overview of our school systems. Probably give a little bit of a more robust update today because the decision was made to make this a committee that will meet 3 times a year. So I will try to do all of Todd Jepson's wonderful information justice. So we focused quite a bit on the middle school and the primary schools. Middle school was built in 96 and now has 12 modular classrooms for the 6th grade. Modulars were from 2000 to 2008. Primary schools were altogether original builds, 1957 through 65, all renovated in 93. Blue Point and Pleasant Hill have 4 modular classrooms and Eight Corners has 10. All modular classrooms were between 01 and 2020. Our classroom size is not at DOE recommendations, which is 1,000 square feet for kindergarten and 800 for grades 1 to 5. Our K2 original buildings are 740 square feet. The 93 additions are 752 and the old modulars are 706 and the new modular is 700. We reviewed a lot of the expansion challenges at all the primary school and middle school, spanning from small spaces to the surrounding areas being either neighborhoods or commercial areas. The actual land itself, whether it be sloping or needing fills, things like that. We reviewed that as well. Current building challenges. The middle school is fully air conditioned, although it does use 123 heat pumps in order to do it due to a poor engineering layout, and all but 12 have been replaced. The natural gas boiler will need replacement in the next 1 to 2 years. The cooling tower for the AC has aged and has had the major components replaced in the past 14. A new generator is needed. The 6th grade portable is at its limit for the electrical space and all the plumbing fixtures have aged. There is no local shut off and overall not enough bathroom capacity for the amount of student and professionals in the building. The roof needs to be replaced. The windows are showing signs of heat loss and they've begun to replace them. Insulation is poor, the siding is aged. The 6th grade detached building has some safety and security concerns as well. The traffic issues, including the bus loop and the student drop off, just not adequately meeting the current needs for the primary schools. The main building has no air conditioning, only the main offices and the portables have AC. 3 of the 6 forced hot water boilers now need to be replaced and 2 boilers were replaced at Eight Corners this past summer. Forced hot water heating is running under bookcases, which can cause from overheating and challenging on cold days. Poor insulation, entrance concerns, layout also not conducive to expanding. Sorry about that. as well as drop off, parking, and pickup being problematic at all. Additionally, some issues with the AC in the main buildings, which has really come up because kids are now coming to school with AC requirements in their IEPs or doctor's notes saying as such. So these are creating more prominent needs to be addressed. There is more in the notes from the meeting. That being said, there was a significant and wonderful amount of work done by Todd and his team during the summer of 2024. The K2 buildings exteriors got refreshed and repaired. The Blue Point ADA ramp was replaced and a roof was installed. The 8 corners, some of the roof was replaced and 2 boilers were replaced, and all the parking lots in K2 saw repairs. The middle school had 12 heat pumps replaced. The ADA ramp was covered, and both sets of stairs and the decks to the 6th grade portable were replaced. They retrofitted some bathrooms. They renovated 3 science labs to gain classrooms. They began planning to replace backup generators and transformers for next summer. The high school, they converted old computer labs into classrooms, which was extensive amount of work due to the built-in counters and the level of work required to transition. And then there was extensive work done on the auditorium, refinishing, the gym floors, replacing the detectable warning on the ramps into the main entrance, and the parking lot work. Wentworth flooring was replaced and changes to the curbing to be less hazardous. And then in general, we had some discussion about the level of challenges they have due to the fact that these buildings rarely sleep throughout the year. They're used throughout the summers, they're used throughout, which that extensive level of use on some of our buildings causes early wear and tear, as well as trying to fit in the timing for all of this work to be done. And additionally, juggling the school year and getting the work done that isn't going to disrupt student learning. So really wonderful work by Todd and all of his team over the summer, and a lot to plan for. So our next meeting will be in late January, early February. I will hopefully be able to put that together in early January and announce the date closer to that time. And that will be focused on budgetary needs for the facilities prior to putting together a budget.
Awesome, thank you. And congratulations on doing your very first report. All right, negotiations.
I don't have a lot of updates on negotiations. We've continued to meet. We are at this point waiting to hear back on the 3rd contract, and that's for custodians and food service. And I apologize for not putting food service in that title. I thought I did, and I meant to add it. So once we get an update from them, we'll know what our next steps are, and we'll look forward to getting everybody to have a fair compensation through their packages. And then as soon as we, thank you, Diane, as soon as we get to the end of this one, we're going to start on the teacher's contract, which expires in the middle of next summer. And it is the board's desire to make sure that negotiation is well underway and complete before the end of the school year.
Very good, thank you. And you're the next as well.
So policy is a little tricky because we just had our meeting moments ago. But we did, in that meeting, we as a preview went through the field trip policy, which will be coming up later for a vote. We also, I'm not really sure why it says second reading of BDG. We did that a long time ago, so that should be taken out. We continued our Title IX policies being updated, the ACAA -R2, the Student Sex Discrimination Harassment Complaint Procedure. We got through that policy, which is a pretty intensely long policy, and I expect that'll be coming up in the near future for first reading. We have a couple things to check on, and then we did not get to anything else beyond that, but we did add another meeting. So our next meeting date originally was November 7th, and that should be 5 o'clock because we just changed the time. Sorry, I'm not able to update the slides between the 2 meetings. But we're going to be meeting, added a special meeting on October 29th at 5 o'clock to try to get caught up on these policies. And we really want to get through the federally required ones. That's the ACAB kind of suite, those three. I mean, we're really eager to get to the student use of cellular technology. I know that that's a lot of, there's a lot of interest right now in our community regarding that policy, and we want to be responsive to that. So that is the goal, is sort of in the next two meetings to get caught up and back on track reviewing the policies. And then once we're caught up with the more urgent needs, we go back to the more routine, getting through all the old and updating all the old policies. So anyway, thank you for everyone to updating the slide. So now that it's more accurate. And that brings us to DEI. So the meeting in September was canceled. Our next meeting is Wednesday, October 9th. That's a change. We usually meet on Tuesdays. So just anyone who's tuning in, it is Wednesday, October 9th from 6 to 7:30. It's a hybrid meeting in the AP room at the high school or via Zoom. We had a pretty robust discussion at the workshop last month, our last meeting, which was last month. And I suggest anybody interested in sort of what the DEI committee is up to review that workshop live stream. It's available on the website. But we are going to review the meeting notes and that meeting topic with the committee to just sort of discuss what the board kind of went over last time. And obviously the board's going to have another workshop completing. I think we're done with that conversation, but moving on to complete reviewing our goals at the end of this month at our next meeting. So.
All right, thank you, Freyla. All right, liaison reports. Is there anyone making a liaison report?
So I spoke with Don Cushing today. There isn't a whole lot. He talked mostly about the connector project, and I did ask him about the community center, and apparently it's not like a definite that it'll be on in June, but there was a move to put it on in June. So obviously we need to keep our eyes on that. There wasn't a whole lot else to report that is specifically relevant to the school board.
Yeah, the council's finance committee is meeting on, I believe it's the 10th, October 10th, which is next week. And they did invite us to attend. Let me just make sure I have the right date. Yes, October 10th. They did invite us to attend, and I think what they are looking to start doing is creating a townwide capital plan. So spending plan, and really laying out projects and when they would hope to bring them to referendum and when they would be funded. So this is the idea, of course, is to give the community a better idea as to what's going on. And so I'm thinking we might hear more, because that is the community center was mentioned there
Yeah.
as well. So I'm
Okay.
hoping we'll hear.
Thank you.
A
I did,
little bit more.
I did not catch that
Yeah.
piece.
Yeah.
And I think that's
All
it.
right. Are there any other liaison updates? Did you want to talk about your meeting, did you have? Yeah, it did happen, but did you say you wanted to talk about it with the inflation? When you were talking about finance?
Yeah, no. But if anyone has read the delegation notes and has more thoughts, I would love to hear them before my meeting, which is coming up in a couple weeks, actually. So next Saturday. It's not this Saturday, but it's Saturday after next Saturday.
So do you have, I must have misheard you though. So then can I ask my question now? So did Kate give you more information about how the formula hasn't stayed up to date with inflation?
Yeah, that is true. The formula is relatively static. It is not indexed to inflation. And given that the way that the formula is created, and Kate's gonna correct me, the way the formula is created is sort of, it's not based on what our schools spend. So they don't take the state of Maine's actual school expenditures by district and add it up and then divide that. What it is, it's a calculation that they make, what they believe at the cost of education should be. And I think some of the numbers they use are relatively static, which means they don't keep up with inflation. So if you bought a box of paper and a pack of scissors and pencils for your classroom this year, it would have cost more than it did a couple of years ago, and a lot more than it did 10 years ago. So if those estimates that are going into that formula are not keeping up with the pace of inflation, then the actual cost of education is growing larger every year, but the formula is not keeping pace with that.
So I know we did talk about that is an important piece. So that is something I would definitely ask to advocate on for, Scarborough, as we mentioned. Those dollars that we receive from the formula offset tax contributions, right? So it offsets the expenditure and our ask of the community. So the more we can advocate for that, I would be a strong supporter.
Absolutely.
All right, agenda item, where are we? Oh, well, we're just gonna move on to the student reports. Happy, are you ready to do your first? This is your first, right? Yes, congratulations to you too.
New this year at the middle school are movement breaks and Miss Terrell, the middle school principal, says during this supervised outdoor movement break, students are provided equipment to play games, appropriately socialize, and get moving. Movement has been shown to relieve stress, improve concentration, and increase the student's ability to retain information during academic classes. We are very excited to provide this opportunity to our Scarborough Middle School students. And today, the high schoolers in grade 9 through 11 had testing, and students in grade 12 had a financial wellness workshop. So, around 2 weeks ago, Wentworth had their open house, and the principal said the school was filled with amazing energy, positivity, and truly excited people. And the second picture are shown the second graders from 8 Corners. They got to go to the Cumberland Fair on a field trip. And finally, this week at Pleasant Hill School, school counselors Molly Sesman and PE teacher Alex Spark are teaming up to kick off their Safer, Smarter Kids program to provide abuse prevention education. So this week, all students completed a trusted triangle of at least 3 grown-up buddies they can go to for help. And kindergarteners and first graders practice using a safety stop sign and an I mean business voice to let others know when they are feeling unsafe. And second graders learned about being aware of their surroundings to spot unsafe situations and discuss the importance of knowing their address and phone number and with whom it's safe to share the information. Yep.
Awesome job, Abby. Thank you. All right, agenda item 10.0 is general public comment. Is there anyone wishing to make general public comment this evening? That's easy. Oh, yeah. All right, seeing none, we will close general public comment. Agenda item 11.0 is continuing business. 11.1 is the second reading of policy IJOA field trips.
So we took this, we reviewed this policy IJOA today on field trips. There wasn't a lot of feedback, but there was one blank spot that was spotted. And so we have come back with a material change, and I would direct your attention to that. So in the other school-sponsored trips, so specifically, these are trips that are organized and conducted by one or more employees of Scarborough Public Schools as a supplement to the curriculum, a class social activity, or an activity planned by a student, club, or organization. These trips may be in overnight or long distance, in-state or out-of-state, and even foreign travel, and then must directly relate to curriculum or activities for which a student club is organized. So it's that category of trip. It requires that the staff or administrator seeking approval for the trip furnish the following information, and there's a list that must be given to the superintendent while they evaluate the approval of any trip. Subsection K was the arrangements for the adult supervision or chaperone ratio. And then originally it had a ratio number with a minimum ratio. At our meeting today, the policy committee decided that the more appropriate language would be arrangements for an appropriate number of adult supervision chaperones that align with the activity and ages of the students. And that's because even if there is a minimum ratio given, that ratio would be different if the trip was with the younger kiddos in kindergarten, first grade versus high schoolers, if it was in-state, out-of-state, if it was overnight. It was in a big city. There are so many different variables that it was really impossible to make a logical ratio fit. And so given that this is a criteria for evaluation by the superintendent is delegated the authority to approve or disapprove and could have moved that ratio as part of that process. Just delegate the authority to the superintendent to decide and to ensure that the chaperones and the supervision is appropriate. That was the only change that we made. And otherwise it stayed the same, but happy to talk about any questions.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the second reading of policy IJOA field trips as presented?
So moved.
Second.
All right, is there any discussion? Do you want to quickly talk about the fact that we're combining the two?
Thank you. Yes, I forgot something. We had talked about IJOA, and IJOA is the name / the way that the numeric way that this policy is classified. But this policy will actually take the place of two current policies. The current IJOA, which is a field trip policy, which is much shorter than this one, but also IJOAA, which is educational trips to foreign countries. So our current policies, which were reviewed over 2 decades ago in 2002 and 2004, they break apart different field trip opportunities, making one having to do with travel abroad and one having to do with field trips and other student travel. This policy it was based on a model policy and takes the place of both of those policies. So just the board's aware that this will eliminate IJOAA and has adopted into it a process to evaluate any type of field trip that would be related to the school.
Right, sure. All right, we have a first, a second. All in favor of approving the second reading of policy IJOA field trips as presented? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 12.0 is new business. 12.1 is the FY 24 year-end financial report. So Kate, would you like to join us? Yes, come on down.
Am I playing Price is Right?
The Price is Right was just in Portland.
Oh,
Wheel of Fortune is tonight.
that's exciting. My goodness. What'd you win, Shannon?
Not good to
A
attend.
living room suite? That just takes me like to the 70s instantly. It's really funny. My goodness. So hi, everybody. It's time to talk about the end of FY 24. When we talk about FY, that's fiscal year, and FY 24 is the financial year that runs from July 1st of 2023, bless you, to June 30th of 2024. So it feels in a lot of ways like we're long past that moment, but we are in the midst of closing out the old year in the finance department, town and school, and working with auditors to do accurate reporting to finish that year. And this is a piece of that process where I come to you folks and ask for a couple of actions, but also give you and the public an opportunity to hear about what went on from the lens of finance last year. So we have a couple of documents. I've given handouts. Our large studio audience here could pick up a copy, but each of you has 2 documents. One has fancy Easter colors, and that's budget transfers, which we'll talk about. And the other is the actual financial statement. And as I go along, I'll mention sort of what page I'm talking about in the financial statement. These will be posted. They're currently posted with the school board agenda, but we have all of our financial reports ultimately living on the Scarborough Public Schools website. We have 2 different places where those live. One is on the Finance Committee's webpage, and the other is the Business Office webpage. So if you're cruising around on our website, you should be able to find financial reports and audits from this year and years past as well. Next slide. Thank you, sir. All right, so I'm going to dive right in here. I'll point out first that on the top of the financial statement, it says pending audit. And That's because the auditors do go through everything with us, top to bottom, before they issue a final financial report for the year. And occasionally they'll find a change or something that needs to be reclassified. The cool thing this year is that the auditors are really early. The town was ready to go, and they've already been here. They were here last week working with us, which is a bit of a change from past years where we've been slow to get those reports out. So we're in really good shape. At the time of this report, things are pretty well nailed down. There's a couple things that need to move around. And one of the things that we'll need to move are the action items that you're taking tonight, and that can help us solidify those reports. So the first page, we're talking about the top of page 4 of the financial statement. My financial statements usually have a story in the front. We have a nice long 3-page narrative that's attached to this document. And that's for folks who don't necessarily have the time or the will to listen to me make this speech or to watch me on video. It basically is going to say all the same things that I'm saying to you tonight, possibly without as many jokes. But on page 4, you'll see the beginning of the actual financial statement, which is the dollars and cents. So the FY24 fiscal year ended with an overall surplus in the general fund budget of just under $2.3 million. Here we're going to talk about expenditures. Expenditures came in under budget by a little over $2 million. And that seems like a big number. It represents 3.4% of the FY24 operating budget. Understandably, with personnel costs made up of 80% of our budget, most of the surplus generated was in this area. This is a fairly familiar story, I think, to you folks, and to folks who have listened to the budget conversations that we've had. The labor market has been pretty much out of control, and staffing has been really difficult. Similar to last year, the most significant staffing shortages we found in special services and bus drivers and custodians. So what you see here are the big buckets of savings, budget to actual, at the end of the year. We had multiple openings in food service as well, but food service workers are not paid out of the general fund. General fund is K-12 regular education. So we'll talk about food service a little later on. Every year we see savings from ordinary turnover and open positions. So every time someone comes and goes, salaries and benefits change. And we generally have what we call breakage, or a savings from our budget to our actual. What I've noticed recently, last year particularly, is people leaving mid-year, people retiring early or resigning to go and find something else to do. And it used to be we had a fairly simple cycle of folks would work the school year and then they'd go. We have turnover every day now. So we also have open positions every day now, which is, not the norm in the past, but each time a position sits open for more than a day or two, you're saving money. It's not a way we want to save money, but it does have that impact. So even that normal turnover and open positions is higher than what we would have seen a few years ago. So we're talking about this $2 million surplus of budget to actual and expenditures. And you can see at the bottom there, about half of that, little over half of that, is attributable to salaries and benefit savings. We did talk during the budget process about using contracted services to fill in the gaps where we had essential work that needed to get done and we didn't have people to do it. I don't have a number for buses, but I did kind of pick up a number for custodians because we use custodial services, and we continue to use custodial services to help fill in where we don't have filled positions. And that number for FY24 was about $200,000. Special services, we spent about another $100,000 in education services for special ed programs. Some of that came from this budget, some of that came from grant funds. And we were also doing kind of creative things that I think you heard about from Chris when we were talking about budgeting, of combining two ed tech positions and trying to find a specialist who might take a job to do that work. But even so, I mean, we've got almost $500,000 of savings in special education. So we really have some work to do to fill those positions. Certainly with the new bargaining agreement for our support staff, we're really, really hopeful that that will make us more competitive in this job market because there's just aren't enough people to do the work. So we need to, shall I use the word steal? We need to entice them from other work. And we may be in a better position to do that this year. I think we'll do the next slide, and we're still talking about expenditures. Some of the savings that we saw came in other areas besides personnel, programs and services. Some smaller numbers here, but a couple of big ones. In curriculum, we had the advantage of some new eyes on our programs with Katie Vitro joining us. And you all have kind of alluded to some of the work that she's doing. She's looking at what we had in place, making some refinements, making some improvements, but also I use the expression deferred updates. What she's doing is really taking a thoughtful approach to what we do have and taking time to not just renew the same thing, whatever curriculum material you might want to refer to, not just necessarily say, okay, yes, we'll do that again, we'll do that again, we'll do that again, but taking the time to actually reflect on the value of those programs and whether they need to be updated or replaced or renewed because they're great, right? So we did see a little savings in her department for that reason. Athletics and activities, we're still having trouble filling coaching positions. I just saw something in the paper the other day about referees, officials, game officials, and that they're literally canceling games because they can't find officials. So it's not a Scarborough problem, it's a statewide problem or regional problem, but every time that we're not able to have a coach for a team or have 5 coaches when we really wanted 6, we save a little bit of money there. Special services, there's another chunk of special services where we saved money on lower than expected tuition costs. That is tuition for students who are attending special purpose private schools outside the district. And just to put this in context a little bit, when we budget, of course, we budget based on the number of kids that we know are already in outside placements, and then students that we think may be placed during the course of the next year. And then we don't really have a mechanism for deciding, oh, a student's going to come back to Scarborough and we won't have that expense, but we do sort of have a sense of turnover there as well, because in a perfect world, we would provide the education for all of our students in-house. We talked a little bit during the budget process about how not having sufficient staff can impact that. And if you can't provide a super specialized service for a child because you don't have enough people to do that, you may look at an outside placement. So again, to put it in context, one placement for one kid for 1 year, one student can cost $70,000 to $80,000. So if you're saying, here are the kids that we have, here are the costs that we think we're going to have, and we better leave a space or leave room in our budget for these other 2 placements that we think might be happening. Well, if they don't happen, then you save a lot of money, which is nice. If they do happen, you have to have the money. Other savings in operations. Debt service, again, saved me some money this year. It was a big chunk last year because the town delayed a bond issue. It actually was supposed to be in FY23. It did happen in FY24, but because of the timing, we had lower than expected interest costs. So this is sort of almost the tail end of the impact that we had last year. And in facilities, this is kind of a nice story. I have lots of terrible stories, but energy costs, for one thing, we found that we had actually budgeted well for the super volatile energy costs that we've seen over the past few years. And, you know, we made out well budget to actual in that regard, natural gas, oil, all those costs, gasoline even trying to stabilize a little bit. But the reason this is a nice story is that Scarborough joined an energy alternative, back that up, alternative energy consortium. How many years ago now? 4 or 5 years ago? Yeah, it's been a while. And it's a partnership with other districts, nonprofits, LL Bean is in there. Anybody could join this, right? It's a big group of people who invested in a 20-year contract to support solar, hydropower, and other magical energies that may be invented. Oh, I left wind out. But alternative energy production, right? And so the idea was that each community would commit to buying energy from these alternative energy producers. When we do, we pay the alternative energy producer, but we get a credit on our CMP bill. Because let's say you have a solar farm, they're putting power back into the grid, which CMP takes an advantage of, and we get sort of a bonus for it. So the first thing that happens is that we save money on the expenditure side because our CMP bill goes down. We have this hooked up to our 3 biggest schools. The small schools don't qualify, so there's a good reason to build a great big one. The high school, middle school, and Wentworth electricity accounts are all connected to this plan. And so we do pay a bunch of little individual solar farms, hydropower projects across the state. And on our CMP bill, we get a rebate. And when we get to revenues in a minute, in a slide, you'll see that there's another bonus to that, which is that you get alternative energy credits. And those credits actually can be sold on a market. And I know you've probably heard of people buying offsets, like, what's the word that they use? We're trying to be carbon neutral, right? So when you hear somebody say, oh, we're going to be carbon neutral, it doesn't necessarily mean that their factory that they have is actually not producing pollutants. What it means is that they're buying these alternative energy credits to offset whatever kind of environmental damage they might do, right? And those have quite a bit of value. This last year, we made in actual cash returns $20,000, which, that's not bad. And each year, as we've been in this consortium, more and more of these projects have come online. So it started, the first year it was, you couldn't even tell, right? And then the second year was a little bit more and a little bit more. And now we're to the point where there's a couple dozen of these programs online. So it's really interesting. It's been fun to watch. All right, so that was about another $500,000 in expenditure savings there. Let's see. Yes, please. I'm sorry, I'm being very rambly. So these are the rules. School board has a policy, DBJ, which requires the board to review and vote for approval of budget transfers for any individual account overspent by $10,000 or more. And that's what that candy stripe report is. We have 9 expense accounts this year, which I must say is not too bad, considering there are over 700 individual accounts in our budget. We have 9 of them with deficits that require budget transfers. And in that handout, the first page shows those accounts. It shows the deficit, and then it shows the money that is available in another account. so that a budget transfer can be done to offset the deficit. In general fund expenditures, every budget category, the voter categories, ran at least a small surplus this year. And all of the overspent accounts can be covered with transfers within the same budget category, with the exception of legal services, where we're going to use a transfer from debt services. As I said, debt service had a nice fat surplus. Along with policy DBJ, we have to think about state statute, and there is a state statute that talks about transfers between budget categories. So when the state mandated that we have voter referendums for our budgets, they said you need to lay it out this way. They were very specific about you need to put it in these voter categories. So the voters need to know you're spending this money on special education and this money on student services and this money on transportation. And at the same time, they said, you can't just willy-nilly change your mind and spend it somewhere else. You can't transfer more than 5% of any budget category to another budget category. You can't reduce it by more than 5%. So there's a summary in that little spreadsheet as well. I believe it's the second page of the spreadsheet. There's a summary by budget category. And we do that so that the auditors can see, yeah, we followed the statute. We didn't transfer more than 5%. And this includes the transfers that you would be doing this evening. The third page of that document has one intercategory adjustment that we made mid-year because I discovered that a guidance employee had been budgeted in regular education, regular instruction. So we just made the transfer as a sort of clerical fix from that one category to the other. And again, it's under 5%, so not problematic. All right, let's go on to revenue. And this is at the bottom of page 4 on the financial statement. As everybody knows, we get most of our school revenues from property taxes and using fund balance. So we're generally really close to budget projections at year end because we don't have a lot of other things that can fluctuate. That's true of FY24. In FY24, we actually had a small surplus. And most of that, about $164,000 of that, came from the Department of Education. They allocated a new set of funds for what they called MLL hardship, and it was in response to communities reaching out to the Department of Ed and saying, oh my gosh, we have all these new Mainers, we have all these folks coming into our community. Some small communities had never seen that kind of influx before and didn't really have the resources to help folks at a level a little bit higher than what they would have normally expected from somebody moving in from, you know, Buxton to Scarborough. Now they're coming from the Congo to Scarborough, and that's a bigger lift for folks, right? So they created a fund and they distributed it along with state subsidy. So when you look at the financial statement, there's a separate line for it just below the state subsidy line, and that's where most of the extra money came from. We have a little bit of a surplus as well on state agency clients, which are what they used to call in the olden days the wards of the state. They're children whose guardian is actually the state of Maine. And for some services that are provided in schools, the school departments can bill the state for those services. And it's really dependent on whether a child in your district happens to qualify for those services. So it's a very volatile thing to predict when you're budgeting. And for quite a few years, we were getting virtually no state agency client reimbursements because we had no state agency client students. In FY24, we just suddenly had a big burst of kids moving into the district who did qualify for reimbursements. So we had a little bit of an overage in our what we had anticipated receiving for revenues. We had a surplus there, and it looks like that continues to grow, and we're going to have a surplus again in FY25 based on what I'm seeing right now. Now, under other miscellaneous, there's those alternative energy credits. That's the extra 20 grand that I was just talking about with the solar and wind power and hydropower credits that we're selling. And so for FY25, our first quarter statement, you'll see I've given that its own line now because it's starting to be significant enough that it's not really miscellaneous anymore. It's something we really want to look at and call out, I think, in our statements. All right, so if we move on to the top of page 5, this chart shows you the big picture transition throughout the beginning, from the beginning to the end of the fiscal year. So you start at the top with July 1st of 2023. We had a fund balance at the end of the fiscal year 23. We used some of that for revenue in our FY24 budget. And then what we call an undesignated fund balance is basically your savings account, right? That's the $2 million. Then in the middle of the chart, you have what happened during the course of FY24. Appropriations balance means the savings that we had against what was budgeted for expenditures. Revenue balance is the extra revenue that we received. And you'll see that I've included a reduction of $800,000 in here on the assumption that, or in hopes that, I guess, the board will approve that tonight at the recommendation of me and the Finance Committee, which leaves just under $1.5 million generated during the course of FY24. So you add that to the earlier fund balance, and you take out another $1.5 million that we're using for revenue in FY25. We've already committed that. And the bottom line is almost identical to where we started on July 1st of 2023, which is kind of interesting. Interesting if you're an accountant, right? So we've preserved $2.2 million in undesignated fund balance. And I'm often asked about fund balance and why do you have leftovers? Why did you raise too much money? Why do you have $2 million sort of lying around? It's interesting to look at the town actually has a pretty stringent policy about fund balance. They require, or I guess they have a goal, let's say, and they've met it, and they're continuing to meet it, of holding no less than 8.33% of any given year's budget as fund balance. And that's 8.33% is supposed to represent a month's worth of spending, right? So you take your budget, you divide it by 12 months, that's 8.33%. And it's kind of like in your household budget where you say, oh, you know, we really need to have savings account. I'm still working on mine. That has enough money for us to get through and, you know, fill in the blank. Like, I really wish that we would have enough money that if everybody lost their job or somebody got sick, that we could make it through X amount of time, right? So it's really important for towns to have that because when they go out to borrow money, when they're being audited, when they're trying to prove fiscal competence and the ability to manage funds, having that little bit of savings, and in a town this size, it's a big bit of savings, right, is essential to making sure that we are graded well on our fiscal health. The school department does not have 8.33% of this year's budget in savings. The state statute has a different approach to public schools. They say that a school department can't hold more than 5% of any year's budget in surplus or like in undesignated fund balance without using it for some purpose. And the purpose is usually put it back in for revenue for the ensuing year or the year after. So that's what we tend to do is we'll take what we have for fund balance and we'll apply in the following year some of that as revenue to lower the impact on our local taxpayers. And the state statute is really based on the idea that I started with, like, why are you raising too much money? If you raise too much money, you got to give it back, right? So we're able to give it back year over year. And we're also able to contribute to the health of the town's fund balance by having that $2 million in the bank because the town, we are the town, right? So our balance is part of that calculation when the bond rating folks are looking at us or when the banks are looking at us for borrowing. The other thing that we can do with excess surplus, and this has been since FY22, is the capital reserve fund. And we actually established the capital reserve fund. There's some notes on one of these sheets for you about that. We established that in 2022 and we got some extra general purpose aid, some state subsidy after we'd already passed our budget and after we'd already met our 3% tax increase goal. And so it was decided, one of the things that you can do statutorily with that money is to create a reserve fund for a number of different purposes. We decided to create the capital reserve fund then. And then last year we added to it, and this year we're going to add to it again. We're also using the capital reserve fund. We're building it up and spending it down, right? So we'll talk about that on a later slide. All right, so after general fund, which is where most of our money and most of our attention goes, the financial statement also includes adult ed, school nutrition. Starting in the middle of page 5, we go into those other smaller funds. At the bottom of page 5 is adult ed. And I'll have you go forward one slide for me, Ray. You guys just had a presentation about adult ed, so you are like more in the know than a lot of times. Those guys do such amazing work. Tuition revenues. We still have a little bit of a shortfall in tuition revenues, but the enrichment programs are really growing. And I'd say health services courses are less popular. Even they're starting to come back a little bit this year, I've noticed. The CNA courses. Last year, I don't think anybody really wanted to go into health services. They all sort of stepped away during COVID and they're like, yeah, no thanks, that's a horrible idea. But last year we started to see a little smidge of growth. This year, I think we're really seeing some more. But definitely the MLL programs have been just booming. And when I say MLL programs, we have programs, as you heard before, that provide literacy instruction for folks who are not native English speakers, but also workforce training. And they've done some really creative things to combine the two so that a person is getting training in both language and skills at the same time. So that's been really super. In terms of finance and expenditures, we were pretty much right on target with our budget predictions. And in revenues, again, course reimbursement or course tuition is coming up, but grant funds have made up the difference. And as you probably heard from Marianne, she is very aggressive about seeking grant funds wherever she can. We belong to a couple of different consortia, and luckily there are a lot of funds available for adult ed programs, so it's worked out really well. Partnerships with businesses as well, businesses and health service providers. So adult ed fund balance is at 31,000, and that is after using 35,000 as revenue in the FY25 for some of the same reasons we just talked about. Use of fund balance as revenue, non-tax revenue. School nutrition. You guys need to have a presentation from them too. They're pretty awesome. At the top of page 6 is school nutrition. They continue to thrive financially. In FY22, you probably remember we started to do universal free meals. That was a federal program. And after the federal government decided we were fine again in FY23, the state luckily picked up the ball and passed legislation to fund the difference and allow us to keep going with that. So we continue to have free meals for any student, regardless of their economic status. And so the result of that was that meal counts just exploded. And I was looking at some of the numbers in our claims to the state, and I looked at, back in 2019, and then I looked at where we were at in 2024, in the spring of 2024, it was 12 times more meals served. And reimbursement was up 220%, which is nice, right? So the revenues have been extraordinary, but the point of this is the amount of work that these same people are doing and the amount of kids that they're feeding is just extraordinary and wonderful. You know, it's great for our kids. We have made some investments. I mentioned the dough sheeter, which is a great name. It's a great big dough roller for making pizza. So we can, instead of buying frozen or refrigerated pizza doughs and then making the big pan pizzas, they can make their own, and it's really good. So that's a cool gadget. We also, not in 24, but 25 funds, we just bought what I like to call the muffin squirter, which is, it has a real name, but it's like a thing that you can, instead of picking up the bowl and scooping out the batter into 800 different little tiny muffin cups, it's got a doodad, right? Yeah, you know what that is, right? The muffin squirter. Exactly. And you're not breaking the backs of the people who are lifting the big bowl, right? Okay, so cool, fun stuff. I mentioned the van. So we had a little surplus and we have this big fund balance left over from FY22, which is when all of this stuff started and the Fed started to really pour money in. Interestingly, we've had a negative fund balance for like 15 years in school nutrition before COVID. Every year we would run a little bit of a deficit, sometimes big deficit, sometimes little deficit, but we weren't getting the reimbursement to cover our costs. Now we flipped the script, and all of a sudden in the fall of 23, the state reached out to us and said, you guys have too much money. You have too much fund balance. And Peter and I sort of went, really? What? That's a thing? The answer was yes, that the feds, the USDA has a rule that says you can't carry more than 3 months of your average operating costs. So then again, this goes back to how much money should you keep and how much money should you give back, right? And that we had exceeded that by about $18,000. And they said, you got to make a plan to spend that right now. And we said, well, okay, we can spend $18,000. And they had all these suggestions, like things, you know, what should you buy? Well, we had already budgeted for a new van because we called it the lunch truck, but it was just an old cargo van with the seats taken out, and it was pretty much falling apart. And so we had on our vehicle replacement schedule a new van, and we had already budgeted for it in capital, and we said, oh, well, we'll just charge it to the school lunch program because that's what it's used for. And so out of that, we ended up spending $45,000 and getting a gorgeous, brand new Transit. It's electric, which is really cool because it's one of the vehicles that only just goes around town. It goes out from Wentworth to the 3 K2 schools to deliver food every day. It goes into the community to do backpack stuff. They were out all summer with it doing free meals in the neighborhoods. It's got a logo on it. It's just awesome. It's super cool. And we're being sustainable too. So there's a picture of that someplace. I keep saying I have to post that. I don't have enough clip art in my presentations. So I don't think they're going to ask us to spend money again this year. They might, but I think if you look at the year-end fund balance, we were able to save funds in personnel. Again, I don't know how they're doing it, but they did have open positions during the course of the year and a lot of turnover. I noticed we're starting to fill some positions, which is really very encouraging. Also, we saved some money in food costs for the first time in a couple of years because food costs have really stabilized in the commercial market, which is where we're shopping. It doesn't look that great at the grocery store yet, but we had budgetary savings there. And so at the end of the day, we generated just a little bit of fund balance, and we still have the leftover 500,000 that we've basically been carrying for 2 years. But our operating costs for 3 months are going to be higher this year. So I think we were so close last year that we'll probably be fine. I would really love to keep $500,000 in the bank because I'm looking forward to the moment when politics changes rules and we have to anticipate not getting full reimbursement for every meal. And I would still like to see us feeding our kids, so I'm excited to have a little bit of money in the bank. Let's talk about special revenue. The last of the COVID grants came in. The last of the money rolled in September of 2023. That was ARP ESSER 3. And that was the final payment for our FY23 summer payroll. We had some supplemental staff that we had hired with those grant funds. ARP local entitlement was a little piece that came supplemental to IDEA. Same situation there. We kind of closed that all out in September of last year. Then we had these new ARP mini grants. The Department of Education kept aside some of those ESSER funds for themselves, or not for themselves, but in order to distribute them for special programming. And with the deadline for spending coming down the road, they decided to put out a few grants. And you heard about the Molly grant, Maine Outdoor Learning Initiative. That was one of them, where we went and studied tide pools and picked up crabs, right? So that was amazing. Another one was a summer learning grant, which we used for the high school credit recovery this summer. A third one is a literacy grant, which we also used over the summer. And the only one that actually appears on the statement, financial statement for FY24 is Molly, because we had some expenses before June 30. The other two will show up, or all three will show up in the first quarter of 25. We have our regular federal grants for education, titles, and local entitlement, which we've thankfully always had. The smaller local grants and special funds, this is all at the bottom of page 6 in the financial statement. We had one item that didn't come, reimbursement that didn't come in timely, the MLTI tech hardware reimbursement. It seems that the state had some issues with staffing. How odd. And we got our invoice into them. This is a replacement for hardware for Chromebooks purchased at the middle school. So this is the same old MLTI program that they had for middle school when Angus King was governor. Latest iteration is that they allow us to purchase Chromebooks at the middle school, and then they'll give us reimbursement. So we have some spending out there that hasn't been reimbursed yet, but they've promised us that it's coming. And depending on what the auditors think, we'll either book it as revenue in FY24 or we'll have it in FY25. I point out the backpack program as well has a little deficit. Again, each year we've been running a little deficit at year end, and then it comes in with a grant in the summertime and it goes back up into the black. We have been talking about trying to get some more outreach there. We were getting tons and tons of donations during the pandemic, and that's dropped off a little bit, although we do have some really great faithful folks who send us checks all the time. And we have grants coming in all the time. I think we could probably do more to advertise that, and I've promised to get us a little button on the webpage and some promotion in the newsletter for that, because people do love to feed people. It's a good thing. Last page of the financial statement is CIP, Capital Improvement Projects. That is a report on what was budgeted for in FY24. And it's interesting because when Alyssa was talking about all of the things that Todd reported out on were actually FY25 budget because it was after July 1. So now I'm really kind of looking back to the summer of 23 for the most part. And these are some of the big things that we did. Capital budget accounts are multi-year accounts. And it's really ongoing buckets of investment like roofs and floors and building envelope and HVAC. And so every year we've got some piece of a project that we're working on, but the type of project or the category of project is the same year after year. We had 3 new buses come in. and we had a tech refresh at the middle school. And the tech refreshes, tech equipment, as you probably know from your own lives, becomes obsolete in about 10 minutes. We have pretty much of a 4-year cycle, which is each phase, right? So K2, Wentworth, middle school and high school. High school being the most expensive because they're the most students and the biggest building. But generally, we go in a 4-year cycle. We try to make sure that we're replacing and updating the devices that the students are using, the devices the staff is using. At the middle school, we did get the advantage of some help from MLTI. That's about $100,000. And apart from that, we refreshed all of the Chromebooks for kids, and we did all the classroom projectors, which were at end of life and not functioning very well. We did roof restoration at middle school in 8 corners. Flooring restoration at middle school. There's a lot of crumbling and deteriorated flooring in the big high traffic areas, the cafeteria, the lobby, and we had some flooring folks come in and do some really nice work there. In HVAC, ongoing stories. We did have one big failed air conditioning unit at the high school, which was a really exciting project because they brought in this huge crane and it's just this massive thing. It's very exciting, like a big city thing, you know. Replacing those failing heat pumps at the middle school. Now we're down to 12 left, right? There's also a systems replacement in HVAC. We have system controls that run this, run the systems, and those are at end of life and no longer supported. The last thing I mentioned in CIP is long-range planning funds. We did have some spending up to the referendum in November of 23, and then we just kind of stepped back and took a reset. I linked in the building projects website front page there for anybody who's interested in hearing more about what Shannon was talking about earlier with the committee coming back together. And as Diane said, we've got some spending to do in this coming year in FY25 on architectural and design services and kind of progressing some of the ideas that are out there. Capital Reserve Fund. It still has a bus on it. This page, Frela had this great, I don't know, like this passion for the idea of the Capital Reserve Funds funding buses. And we did fund buses last year. This year in FY25, we've committed those funds for the building project. And so I put a little school down in the other corner, but we definitely got to keep the buses on there. So I talked about this a bit earlier. This is just a history of how the Capital Reserve Fund came about and where we've added money and what we've used it for over the past 3 years. And we are recommending that we add that $800,000 of available year-end surplus in FY24 to that fund. And if we do that, we're building the fund, which is great, and we're also preserving just about the same level of fund balance as we had last year. So we'll be in a good place in terms of that as well. So that's pretty much the story. These are the action items, which I think Frela is going to take. And I can take questions or I can stand quietly and let you carry on.
Thank you so much for this, Kate, first off. Are there any questions for Kate? I have a question. I think it's more for finance, so I don't think it's for right now. But I'm going to ask it just so maybe you'll help me remember later on. When we look at the capital reserve fund and we purchase buses, I understand logistically that means that we don't have to bond for them. We save on interest payments. You know, I understand all of that. But where Frela loves buses, I love the track and turf. I
Hmm.
think you know that. And
Thanks for knowing
so
that.
I have my eye on that for something a little bit different. And so I'm wondering if you compare the cost savings between purchasing buses and saving on the interest that we would pay if we bonded those versus versus going ahead and bonding those buses and saving that money so that we can pay for the track and turf in its entirety in 10 years. Are we better off to bond the buses? Are we better off to spend the money that we have saved for buses?
Well, I need a crystal ball to answer the question well because of interest rates, right? I would say just theoretically, though, if you're going to bond a bus, you're not going to bond it for a very long period of time because you're going to look at the natural, the useful, expected useful life of the thing you're purchasing. But I seem to recall that the track was about a 15-year life. A bus is about a 10-year life. So I'm going to say it's probably fairly similar in terms of the type of borrowing you would do, the type of interest rate you would get, because the interest rate is going to depend on your amount and your term, plus, the Federal Reserve and
Right.
whatever they happen to be doing. So I'm not sure that there's a clear trade-off, like a clear choice, like, oh, this is so much more logical to do it this way than that way. But it's definitely worth talking about. And I think that the rationale for using the reserve account for the building project stuff this year was interesting and kind of a good one because for pre-planning for a project, you can't bond money for a concept. You can't bond money for an idea because there's no product, there's nothing, there's no collateral. But once you do have a building project and it's approved and affirmed and you're going forward and you have a contract, you could repay yourself for those planning costs because now they are a piece of something that's tangible that an investor would invest in. So, I mean, I know that's not the question that you asked, but you think about those kinds of things, right? Like
Yeah.
if you use it for this purpose, what's your best outcome? And I think that's what you're saying too. Definitely something that we should think about. The other thing is that, the board can, God willing, and we have money, put as much money as they want to into that account. And the board also has the authority to spend it or not spend it, right? And say, we need to preserve this for X. I don't think there would be a need to have a separate, this is the track account and this is the bus account. But you could have a strategy that actually identifies that, right? Like we're always going to have $400,000 for buses, and then we're also going to try to have another $400,000 for fill in the blank, right?
Benefit of the capital reserve fund isn't actually the buses. The buses aren't the value. The buses are the symbol. Buses are an investment that we have to make on a regular basis.
Year over year,
Year over-
every time, right?
Yes, and if you haven't planned ahead for it, you're at the whims of that budget cycle year.
Mhm.
And this allows you to legally and ethically save without taking advantage of our taxpayers by being, I really think financially very fiscally sound.
Right.
So we're not running up taxpayer money to spend it on another day, but we're taking the natural cost savings and planning ahead for future expenditures that will definitely come. And then building in flexibility so that we don't have to find the planning funds for the building somewhere else. We're gonna need flexibility in a couple of years when we start dealing with an influx of students, and we're gonna need some creative solutions. And now we have, it's not a huge amount of money, but we have a little bit set aside to build flexibility in so that we can maneuver the way that we need to be. And we're not bound by the budget process for our budget, not for the town budget. For our budget is very constraining, given the limited amount we're allowed to raise. And given the challenges we face every year to do that and the justification. And so this fund allows, this fund allows us to be fiscally future looking without breaking any rules, without taking advantage of our taxpayers without violating any other rules. And that's why I love this account so much, because it just gives us a little bit of rainy day. We all know we're gonna get caught by that surprise, whether your home and your roof goes and you weren't planning on it, or something else like that. Schools have the same thing on a much larger scale. And this just allows us ability to respond in the moment appropriately without having to go back to the town with an emergency fund request. Or without having to deprive our students of needed services in order to address an emergency.
Yeah, very
I'm right
true.
there with you. It took me a long time to understand that we couldn't just save money. You know, that you couldn't ask for taxpayers' money to save it, right? Well, I shouldn't say it took me a
Yeah.
long time, but it took me a lot of conversations with you to understand that, because I'm used to personal budgeting where you have an emergency account. So when your roof goes or your water heater blows up or whatever happens in your home, right? You have an account to pull from, and it's different. It's different for us. And so this account over the last 2 years, going on 3, has been really exciting. It's really great to
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
options too when
It's
we're.
it's a wonderful
budgeting.
tool, and I think, you know, it takes advantage of the natural financial flow in the school department, because we're not allowed to spend more than what we've budgeted. So we have to budget for all contingencies so that we don't have those curtailments that you're talking about, or pulling from one place to pay another. So knowing that, you know that you're also probably going to have that 3% of your budget. The bigger our budget is, the bigger that 3% is at the end of a year. And if you can, you know, have a designated use for that, that shows the folks in the community that you have thoughtful planning. It's the same thing that the town council is talking about with their capital planning. You've got to have strategy. You have to have an idea of what that money is going to be used for. And you have to, as Freyla said, acknowledge that those costs are coming, whether you have planned for them or not. So why not plan for them?
Do you have a certain amount of, or do we have a certain amount of time that we have to spend the money in the capital reserve fund?
No.
Okay.
No, it's allowed to be preserved for that purpose, as long as it's been appropriately allocated there by the board. So you could save it up. We haven't saved it up yet. We've used a little bit of it each year in our capital budget. And I think, you know, that shows good faith too, because you're saying, well, we're not trying to just stockpile it. But yeah, I mean, if you had something on the horizon and you said, I really want to build that account, and you know, this could be a time to do that.
And for just my understanding of connecting multiple meetings, it sounds like we've approved a track and budgeted for one and had issues having the work actually done. Is that where that money is? No.
No, that money is actually budgeted through the regular capital budget.
Oh, okay.
Now 3 years ago, two years ago budget. So the authority to spend that money was passed at referendum, and it was budgeted through the budget process, and it was designated to be bonded. So there's not actually like a bank account with that money sitting in it right now. What would happen is that as soon as we get the track repaired, in the same way that we did with the turf, we have bills in hand, we know what the expenditures are, and we go out and bond that actual amount. And that's an important point too. The town doesn't usually bond for an expense in advance. They bond for the actual spending. And we're fortunate enough to be able to float, because we have sufficient funds in the bank, we can prepay, if you will, and then reimburse ourselves with a bond issue. Obviously, if you're doing a massive project, you're not going to have that kind of money in the bank. But for our normal capital projects, we wait until we actually know what we spent. So if you have the authority, let's say, to spend $2 million on the generator at the middle school, and you only spend $1.5 million on the generator at the middle school, you don't want to go borrow $2 million because you didn't need it. So in most cases, we'll wait until we know what the actual amount was and then go and get the money for it.
Thank you very
Sense? Sure.
This isn't necessarily your area, but the town, you said the town reserves 8.5%. Is that
Yeah.
of the entire budget or just the town's?
It's based on the town's budget, and they have kind of an interesting I don't want to call it a formula, but they have like a definition of what they consider to be included in that amount. Like they don't include the money that they pay to the county, and they don't include the tax overlay and some of those extraneous things. It's basically their operating budget. So their policy says that they strive to hold 8.33% of the year's operating budget in surplus. And that they would like to, I think the goal is 10%. And the cap is 12%. So if they've got 12% in fund balance of that prior year's budget, they're actually required to do something else with it, right? So there, you kind of feel the synergy between all of these different kind of rules, right? It's like I said earlier, it's the balance between I need to raise money, I need to have savings, but I also don't want to over raise and overtax my community. So from their perspective, in fact, at a recent finance committee meeting with the town, I heard them saying that they thought that with the revenues that they're going to get in FY25, they might hit that 12%, and then they would have excess funds to do something else with. Capital reserve fund or, reduction in tax rate, all kinds of things they could do. But it's great for them to have that goal because again, it really, it affects our bond rating and that's dollars and cents to the community.
Thank you.
I just want to say that I so appreciate having this conversation and thank you for your financial stewardship. We are extremely privileged to be sitting here discussing the ability to add money to our capital reserve funds. When I look around at the neighbors and some of the headlines I'm reading and the people who are losing their jobs and the tax rates that are being hiked in the double digits, and a lot of horror stories in the surrounding communities because of a bunch of choices that were made and difficult choices that were made during really difficult times. I've come to appreciate you, and every time you present, I appreciate you. But just sitting here in this moment, really want to celebrate your hard work and have a lot of gratitude for the fact that we are in a position to be having this lovely discussion about what to do with surplus, and we're not having other discussions which are much harder and more painful. And that is really due to the very sound financial management of this district.
Thank you for saying that. That's very kind. I don't take all the credit. I had a lot of smart people help me make good decisions. And like you said, it's some pretty fraught times over the past few years financially, some wild roller coasters to ride. So I am also grateful that we're in a position to make some investments and not be losing ground. So I agree with you. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right, you're up. It's your time to shine.
Make a motion.
Yeah.
I make a motion to approve and to authorize the budget transfers for all the accounts that were overspent by more than $10,000 as was just presented to the school board by the business office.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? It shows unanimous. Thank you.
I'd like to make a second motion to approve the transfer of the year-end fund balance to the school capital reserve funds, the funds of $800,000 to the general fund surplus created in FY24 as recommended by the business office and the school board finance committee.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All in favor? It also shows it's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. All right, agenda item 12.2 is appointments. 12.2.1 are the lead teachers and clubs. Is there any additional information?
Nope, nothing to add, just as presented.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the lead teachers and clubs as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? It shows unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 12.3 is a donation. 12.3.1 is an M People Credit Union.
Yes, so in your packet, you have a memo from our own Kate Bolton about a request to approve a donation Christina Gerber, who is a social worker at the high school, was contacted by Caitlin Smith of N People Credit Union. Scarborough High School has been the fortunate recipient of a donation from them in the amount of $1,000.53. The money raised was a result of their Ending Hunger campaign through the Maine Credit Union League and is to be used for fighting food insecurity needs of students. A check will be presented upon the approval of this donation. And so we respectfully request that the school board approve acceptance of this donation on behalf of Scarborough High School with many thanks.
Do I have a motion to approve the donation as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Very quickly, this is where my two worlds combine. So first off, the Maine Credit Union League will be recognized in February for this Ending Hunger program that you're hearing about tonight. And it's a national recognition. They have over the last few years raised in excess of $1 million to end hunger for Mainers. So money that credit unions are raising to help local Mainers. So oftentimes we see these donations that come from credit unions for the backpack program, for programs like this, and it's part of a large program across the state. So it's pretty impactful, pretty resourceful, and it's pretty amazing that they'll be recognized. So Maine will be recognized at this national
That's really nice.
convention coming up in February for their efforts. Yeah. All right, so we have a motion, second, all in favor? It shows is unanimous. Thank you so much. Agenda item 13.0 is adjournment. If with no objections, we will adjourn at 8:51 p.m. Thank you so much. Have a great day.